and people will join. So welcome everyone who's joined so far. Welcome to our March meeting. My name is Jack Glassman. I'm chair of the Historic Resources Committee, and I'm also a historical architect with the National Park Service, the regional office, working for the Historic Architecture, Conservation, and Engineering Center. Although I am zooming today from home from the Michigan Peninsula, what is now known as Charlestown, part of Boston. And why don't we begin? I know we're all of our thoughts and prayers are thinking about what's the tragedy unfolding in Ukraine. Just wanted to acknowledge the inconceivable, the human tragedy. I did see, on top of all that, within our field of expertise, did notice that among other, and we'll talk about it a little bit later as well, but groups that are very concerned, of course, and working to try to preserve the sort of the architectural history and the cultural heritage, the art, and so UNESCO has issued some strong statements as well. But I just came across this a day or two ago, this link for one way to help from within our cohort. It's also Women's History Month. So as we've all seen, as we know, there are tons of events and lectures and things that are going on. But this was also an interesting colleague shared with me from House Beautiful magazine, a list of 26 influential women in design history, whose names many of us know and some that we may not. But worth checking out the article. I just pulled out just a couple of them here. Jane Jacobs, Julia Morgan, Beatrix Farrand, and wait, I'll just point out on her name. My goodness, the architect. Anyway, next, I just wanted to remember some towering figures in development, in Boston development, and in history and in preservation. I worked at the Boston Redevelopment Authority in the mid-1980s and 90s, and met Paul McCann, who was a longtime executive assistant to the director. And he ended up assisting 10 or maybe 10 different directors, and his life, the story was fascinating, and the Globe obituary listing him as first and foremost a city builder and a relationship builder throughout his life. It seems very, very apt. He came to the BRA, and he started in 1958 as an office boy and stayed there his entire professional career. And this is when he was in high school, and he worked his way up while he went to Boston College and Suffolk Law School, service in the Army Reserves, and continued and served under from Mayors Hines and Collins and White, Flynn and Menino. What I remembered is, he had this great sort of wry sense of humor, but the sort of calmness. I know there was one time when staff were named in some lawsuit or something, and I felt very comforted talking to him about the process. Now, what I didn't know, though, didn't really appreciate at the time, was that he had also been instrumental in these initiatives to develop affordable housing and to preserve. I'm reading here, preserve and grow many of Boston's historic, cultural, social service, and civic institutions, as well as creating and revitalizing public spaces. So he was involved in Quincy Market and the Charlestown Navy Yard and my old projects and the Harbor Walk. And in fact, he received a Shattuck Award in 1994 and was designated a special Boston landmark. himself. So, Bill Pear, maybe only a few of you know, I met him through the Society of Architectural Historians. Someone else who was involved in so many different, after he came back to Boston after his military service, and then spent most of the rest of his life on Beacon Hill. He was a member of the Nichols House Museum and was on the board secretary and president, and the first resident curator. And then he was a president of Boston Harbor Associates and the president of Boston Preservation Alliance, involved in the public library, and served as director, treasurer, and president of the Gibson House Museum, and as director and president of the Victorian Society of America. Just an amazing sort of career all around in sort of history and preservation. And he was a dual citizen of the United States and Ireland, and proud of his Irish heritage. And he's also a director of, I don't know if I pronounce it correctly, the Irish Society of Boston. So, which leads to Susan Park, who passed away recently. What a towering figure in Boston preservation. She and her husband Joe came to Boston in the 1960s to the South End, and then just became so active in the revitalization for just decades of the South End. And then she was one of the founding members and leaders of the Boston Preservation Alliance, and partnering with Harbor Fest, I think. And what I guess love and remember most is that she was so persuasive and formidable. Really, the term "a force to be reckoned with" is what comes to mind. But it wasn't the sort of a force sort of in the intimidating way, the sort of male macho way, but in a more just kind of persuasive way that she developers of high rises in Boston knew they had to check in with Susan, and it was all part of the process. Before I sort of move on, does anyone want to share any thoughts about the memories of Susan? She will be missed. Okay, other items of note and related to historic resources. People saw in the news that Mayor Wu is beginning the process of sunsetting the famous, infamous urban renewal plans. They're in Boston, and 14 of them active. This all dates back to really the Federal American Housing Act of 1949. In Boston, what looms largest, I think, was the demolition of the West End neighborhood, of course. All the plans were set to expire in April, and the mayor filed an order with City Council that would immediately sunset 5 and then 9 others through the end of the year. So it's complicated. Obviously, it was complicated, and it is, especially because of all the existing land disposition agreements, the LDAs tied to urban renewal powers. So keeping properties affordable, preserving open space, and so on. So we shall see. But in a way, I guess this is part of the mayor's campaign promise to really emphasize planning over the kind of the renewal aspect of redevelopment. And to that end, there's a new position that is to be filled, I guess, still a director of planning, while the former BRA, BPDA is may see a diminished role. We'll see how it plays out. Meanwhile, the former acting mayor, Kim Janey, is working with the Boston Foundation and in charge of spearheading a project. I guess it's just a 1-year project at this point, but to catalog and preserve historic landmarks, not with a capital L, but maybe with a capital L, but historical landmarks in the city's neighborhoods of color. So I just found as an image here the Malcolm X house, early photo of that, just as an example. But that will be great to see the progress on that. And in fact, it would be wonderful, I would think, to maybe invite her if she wanted to give a talk to this group at some point. Maybe we could help. Storing the globe, that was a little nice piece there, remembering and discussing really we're discussing really a myth, actually. And the myth that the enslavers were more cruel in the South, not as cruel up in the North, but some of the historical accounts, I think, are pushing back on that. But in any case, this is one site of the Colonel Robert Oliver House. It's really, he was born in 1700, actually. Oliver, to a prosperous English merchant family that owned 2 sugar plantations. And ultimately came to Boston, brought some of the slaves, no doubt, and they enslaved members of the, if you say that, of the family, built this grand mansion. It's since demolished, but later became a birthplace of Governor Edward Everett. But it's a good story about what they know so far, really, about the people, the research that's been done. So the Thomas Oliver was the last Royal Lieutenant Governor of Massachusetts, and he was forced to flee. This house was called Elmwood, named Elm, but flee with his family in 1774. There was a mob of 4,000 patriots that, on the eve of the American Revolution. So no one knows what happened to the slaves. Speaking of sugar, there's another story that came out around Valentine's Day, when Boston gave America some sugar. So it was a little sweet little piece, a little short essay, not an essay, but an article in the Globe. And here it's just showing the Fort Point Channel area, as the article did. I mean, it's a great map. I did my own version of just circling the 2 American Sugar Refining Company and then New England Confectionery Company, that became known as SMECO. American Sugar Refining is now later became the Gillette World Headquarters, and so that in the future we'll see what happens with that as a development story. But anyway, the sugar it was a thriving industry in Boston that had also had its roots in slavery and the triangle trade of rum and molasses and sugar and that going to West Africa and bringing slaves back and so on. So there's a dark side to the confectionery industry there, but it was thriving in here. And then moving to primarily to Cambridge as sort of the New England, the kind of regional center for sugar. The article, it was also great, by the way, that it gave a shout out to these type of atlases and maps. I thought that was a great little educational piece for those. I mean, many of us are familiar with doing research with Sanborn insurance maps and with atlases. This one is the famous Bromley Atlas in Boston, and how they were color coded for brick and the wood for the harder to insure wood structures, and listing where the sprinkler standpipes were and so on. So it was nice that they just discussed how that those are great tools for research. National Trust, the Preservation Magazine, listed among their winter issue, as they do, all places that are threatened or that have been saved, restored, or lost. And they listed our own Charlestown's iconic and unique rope walk building. They listed it as restored. I think technically I'd say it's more it's a rehabilitated reuse, although certainly the project did bring back some elements that had suffered, or that like there was the windows. So there were certainly elements of restoration. It was cleaned up, and for all the decades that no one could figure out how to deal with this 1/4 mile long, 35-foot wide, most of the building. Now it's multi-housing, and I stopped in on a bike ride and grabbed that not great picture, but of the infinite corridor that runs single loaded, runs all the way down the 1-2-story section. And it's a rental apartments, and I guess it's really sort of rented up going quickly. The architecture and urban design, another Tirani's firm, I don't know if you spell it out, or Nada or whatever, they've been hired by Historic New England to reimagine this, the first of the 3 Harrison Gray Otis houses in Beacon Hill. It's designed by Charles Bulfinch, and it's the headquarters for Historic New England, administrative headquarters and house museum. And so they will be looking at ways to make it, in terms of visitor experience, I think primarily, and I'm sure they'll be looking at it as sort of a master plan of it as well. But it is a building that many of us know has had many different uses in its history, and the street between the widening being moved and the street widening, and you can see in the picture to the right, there's commercial storefronts appended to it, and so it's quite an amazing structure. So for those of you who are not from Boston, definitely worth a visit. Over in South Boston, Southie, saw that finally, after many years of planning and designations by the city, the teardown of the old coal-fired Edison plant is beginning. It will be a massive redevelopment into will be housing, hotel, office, research and development space, 636 housing units, and 2.5 acres of waterfront park, among other features. So it's about 860,000 square feet of office and R&D space. And I misspelled it. It's Hilco Redevelopment Partners, but apologies. But anyway, we'll see how that goes. The preservation aspect of it is most of the, we see the smokestacks, the stacks will be gone, and the logistics of doing the demolition without explosives and right next to this dense neighborhood is what they're tackling, beginning to tackle now. There are 4 massive turbine halls with beautiful tile wall finishes and mosaics, and those will be preserved as part of the community and public space. So in Ukraine, of course, it's everything. Curators are just trying to do what they can to protect the country's treasures, and even some monitoring, trying to at least document the sites that may or may not be may be destroyed, but we'll see. But the kind of companion story I saw is that the U.S. Army, meanwhile, it's actually for 10 years they've been trying to reboot a version of the famous World War II the Monuments Men, these cultural and heritage experts that went to Europe and kind of just to save artwork that we had been looted by the Nazis, and to save and get them back. So it's just bureaucracy apparently with the Army. They just haven't trying to get this program together, but it's still ongoing. But anyway, just wanted to grab a couple of images that one can see of icons and artwork and architecture. You shall see. Lviv is one. UNESCO has put out one article listed from the Architect's newspaper. UNESCO sounds a clarion call to protect Ukraine's historic sites. UNESCO being the United Nations educational, scientific, and cultural organization. There are three UNESCO creative cities, as they've been designated: Lviv, Odessa, and Kharkiv. And Lviv is another designation for it as well. But anyway, just trying to track with satellite analysis and just to do what they can.
There's also the problem that they've been bombing some of the monuments, the Babi Yar, which but recognized the two-day slaughter of thousands of the Jews that were living in Kiev. And I believe it was the UNESCO heritage site also.
Yeah, the site of the largest mass murder of Jewish people during World War II. So the UNESCO Executive Board is scheduled to hold a special session on March 15th, actually. So, and Colin shared with me, there are a couple of, it's in the agenda, and as I finish, I'll repost the link if you haven't gotten the agenda, but there are a couple of the workers who've been in Richmond, Virginia, have been taking down the Robert E. Lee Monument, and then others along the Monument Row in Richmond. The kind of workers were sharing their the whole experience of on the picture on the right is finding the time capsule, but just the emotional things they've sort of gone through. So there are two links in the agenda to this YouTube and another TV interview about that experience of removing the Confederate monuments.
Jack,
yes.
Speaking of monuments, there was a lot about the Theodore Roosevelt being removed from in front of the American Museum of Natural History. And there hasn't been much in the papers about the fact that at the end of February, there was a petition signed by artists and architects and government people throughout the world, especially in the United States, about the removal. And interesting, among the people that have signed the letter are 5 people on the original group of the city government that voted for removing it. And also they point out that where the statue was being removed to, they didn't consult the indigenous nation, the MHA, whose land it will be put on and whose library is going to be built there. And the statue, incredibly, is going to be put on an Indian land, and and it's amazing that the indigenous peoples government group was not consulted about moving the statue to their land, which I think is an interesting comment. And the letter also states that they should, the city should have realized that you're not improving the process, but you're actually creating another situation.
So yeah, so well-meaning, but
not realistic.
Yeah, thanks. This wasn't on my list, but I just thought it was fascinating too. There's a, speaking of the Cold War back, a Cold War nuclear bunker and missile facility. It's in Abilene, Kansas. It's in 1961. It's for sale. There's a little diagram showing a cutaway diagram and some photos that were provided in a news story. And the realtor, I guess they've listed it as an ideal B&B. For $380,000, you can have this facility with no views, but anyway, quite arresting kind of images, I guess. But, presumably the B&B does none of the B's stand for bombers, but bombing. But anyway, it would be an interesting destination hospitality. So, all right. Well, that leads us to our feature presentation. So thrilled to have Prem Shayatam, I messed it up again, to give an encore performance of her presentation given recently at the APT Northeast. She had a compelling abstract of her work and a great presentation about light and use of some state-of-the-art tools and techniques for helping to see art and see color and to interpret it historically. So Prem worked professionally as an interior designer in Bangkok for about 4 years, correct me if I'm wrong. And during the course of, I think, our project experience, decided that she wanted to expand and become a preservation architect. And so she came to, she's now at Columbia University, a master's candidate at the Columbia Graduate School of Architecture, Planning, and Preservation. And also, as well as a student, also a laboratory assistant and a graduate teaching assistant. So really looking forward to the talk. So I'm going to stop my share here. And I guess I have to say, when I first, what it reminded me of, I think it was the APT conference in Colonial Williamsburg, like 2000 or 1999 or something. When I first heard the term during a talk, I heard the term fugitive colors. And I just thought, what is that? That is just like the coolest term for the conservators would use, the sort of like kind of badass name for something that conservatives really hate, which is the colors where colors, certain colors will fade. And I thought it was a neat term to describe something unpleasant. But what it reminded me was growing up and seeing in like big glass commercial storefronts where they would tape up signs, like in the dry cleaners or the grocery store, and they'd be color photographs, but what you'd see over time, they would just be like blue, and the reds would be gone. The fugitive colors there. And I always thought that was really interesting. These weird posters that you'd see. So. All right. So, Prem, why don't you take it away?
All right.
And welcome again.
Can everyone see my screen okay?
Yes.
All right. Yes. Okay. So good morning, everyone. My name is Prem Shayatam. I'm a second-year graduate student in the Historic Preservation program at Columbia University. And this presentation is a part of my finding on my thesis that I'm working on right now with my advisor, Professor Amanda Trianens. So today I would like to talk about a technique which requires no physical touch at all, and using light, we can visually and virtually restore our heritage. So in our traditional Finnish restoration practice, we remove paints, we alter them, we add another layers, we need to physically interact with it. However, there are some instances that we cannot do so, whether is it because the fragile state of the surface, or we don't have enough information to verify the restoration, or just that we are not financially capable to do so. So in these cases, I was thinking about a way to restore the look of the finishes without the need of touching it. And this involved the use of light. So we are a visual being. 70% of our perception of the world is through vision. We see colors, we see pattern, we know that the surface is rough or smooth just by seeing it. And this visual perception involves three factors. So the object, the eyes, and the light. So if we cannot change the object due to the factor that I just mentioned earlier, and then we cannot change our eyes, there's one last option, which is the light that we can do. And this involves projection mapping. So projection mapping is a technique, it's the manipulation of light through projector to alter the surrounding environment without physical touch. It is something that is non-invasive and completely reversible. And just an example to illustrate the use of this technique, last year, the famous immersive Van Gogh came to New York City. And here projection mapping was used to literally transform almost every surface of the venue into the artist's paintings. And this is just an example of how we can use this projection, this technique. And it has been used extensively for the entertainment industry, but it has been used for the cultural heritage industry as well. So after researching on multiple projection mapping projects, there are three key components for this technology, which are the content, the software and hardware, and the surface. So I will walk you through like all of these components, starting with the content, which I will illustrate through some precedent application on cultural heritage. So although not as much as other industries, there are a few projects that have laid the groundwork for our field. So its use for cultural heritage has been classified into three categories. The first one is called transcending, which means that the content projected is not related to the site or the building at all. It is used for commercial purposes. And then the combined mode, meaning that the building serves as like an artistic inspiration for the projection mapping. And then the last one, which is called self-reflection. Here, it enhances the meaning of the heritage. It was used as a reconstruction tool. And this type is what I am going to talk about today through 5 projects. So starting with the first one, the Temple of Dender at the Met. So it is one of the first projects in the US that use this technique for cultural heritage. So people tend to think that so much of the antiquity is all about colorless and monochromatic look of the material, while in fact they love colors. And Dender was one of them. There were many efforts in recent decades to recover the lost character of the Egyptian antiquity, but what the Met did with the Dender was quite unique. So because of constant flooding and wind erosion, there is virtually no original pigment left on the surface of the temple. And to make visitors aware that the temple was vibrant with color 2,000 years ago, the Met used light to paint a scene on the southern facade of the temple. This project is a great example when we cannot verify the correct version of the original colors. So research show exactly that there were colors on the surface of the temple. However, there could have been some elements that could have been there, but they can never prove the existence of them. For example, the skirt here is definitely white, but there could have been a pattern of lion on it, or that the entire background could have been white as well. However, without remaining pigments on the surface, they could not confirm it. For this reason, they created multiple versions of the scene to depict each possibility. And this is another benefit of this technique. And I will end this project with a quote from Dr. Diana Patch, who was in charge with the project in 2013. So, and I think that this helps people realize that aesthetics are different around the world. And this helps you see what that cultural aesthetic is when preservation doesn't allow you to. And I think this is quite powerful aspect of this technology. And the second one, so the Temple of Dender is not the only one affected by time and deterioration. Around the same time in 2015, there was another big and controversial project going on. So this project was the virtual restoration of the Mark Rothko's Harvard murals at Harvard Art Museum. So Rothko is regarded as one of the most important American painters after World War II. His Harvard murals were installed in the Holyoke Center from 1964 to 1979. And during those years, they were exposed to sunlight, changing its crimson red color to a light blue tone. But because of the fragile nature of the mural, the unique matte and gloss surface, and the importance of reversibility, other conservation methods were impossible. So they used projected light to do the restoration instead. And quite different from the Temple of Dender, this project dealt with deteriorated colors, not the complete loss of color. So the challenge here was to correct one color to another. And as you can see here to the left is the current faded version. And then to the right is a virtually restored one. So to do this, a high resolution image of the current deteriorated version was compared to the target image in a computer in terms of color and geometry, which resulted in a compensation image. This image was then sent to the projector to be projected onto the faded version to virtually restore it. And here is the results. They turn off the projector at 4 p.m. every day to let the visitor see the original. And as you can see to the right, the difference was quite dramatic. Some criticized that this project created two versions of the mural series. The first one is the color corrected one, which took the visitor back to 1964, and the unlit original, which bear all the deterioration and subdued color of the past. However, other art critics just admitted that this method was a crossroad for the discipline. And the first two examples are more or less artifacts and art pieces, and they were in traditional museum settings. I would like to show another case which took place in a medieval church in Spain, which is this one, San Clement de Tau in the Catalonia region of Spain. It was built in 1123 and was designated as a World Heritage Site by UNESCO. And although it looked austere on the outside, it housed a very significant fresco, which was considered to be one of the most representative paintings of Barcelona. And it was this one. But because of a salvage campaign in the early 20th century, it was purchased and moved to the National Museum of Catalan Visual Art to prevent it from purchase by private collectors. But in 1959, a replica was done in its original location. However, 10 years ago, it was deteriorated so bad that the Catalan government need to start a project to completely reconstruct the fresco. So at first they wanted to create another replica. However, with further investigation, they found that there was still the original pigment of the fresco left behind this 1959 replica. So the project just shifted quickly to preserve this 12th century remnant as well. So what would be the way to go for them? On the one hand, they wanted to keep the faded paint, but on the other hand, they also wanted to fully reconstruct the fresco. So this was when they turned to projection mapping because it allowed the two to coexist together. So many artists and audio visual technologists work together to create the restoration. On the top video, you can see how they digitally recreate the painting by investigating what was left on the apps and also the more complete version stored in the museum. They mimic a medieval technique of painting, but only in a computer. And on the bottom photo is a placement of multiple projectors in various locations and heights. Together, they cover the entire apse. And to not disrupt the historical atmosphere of the church, they were hidden from visitor view as well. So, and here is the restored version by projection mapping. And the end product was kind of a reel of a 30 minutes long light show playing throughout the day, which showed 3 stages of the fresco. The first one was a faded version on site. The second one was the original kept in the museum. And the last one, which is this one, was the complete version of the apse showing what it might have looked like in 1123. They used animation and lighting technique to emphasize aspect of the fresco. And the show just ended with this intense white floodlight, transitioning from vibrant, colorful past to a current faded and almost blank gaps. And this coexistence just brought us back to the 12th century, while kept the original site as a living document. So the next one is an exhibition in Thomas Cole Museum.
That's a specific Thomas Cole.
Yes, yeah. It's a Thomas Cole house in Catskill. And this project did not deal with any restoration of the space, but they used projection mapping to tell narratives about the artist and his work. So, and it also showed how this technique can be incorporated into a small institutions like a house museum. So the installation here just ranged from very conspicuous on the ceiling with a control panel next to the light switch right there, and then to those that were hidden in a cabinet or behind a picture frame and projected onto like a piece of paper on the table. And they were triggered by a motion sensor, which was hidden behind a table leg. So, and the most recent exhibition there that was just opened last winter was controlled solely by an iPad just sitting unnoticeably on a historic furniture. And yeah, and the last one, I would like to talk about a recent project in 2020. It was not related to the restoration or the distant past, but it redefined and reclaimed the meaning of a controversial monument of Robert E. Lee in Richmond, Virginia. So, unlike the sophisticated hardware and software used in other projects, Dustin Klein and Alec Crickey, who were concert lighting designers, they used an off-the-shelf projector and a laptop plugged into their car to generate this mapping. What was started as a memorial to police violence, they expanded the content to Black empowerment, featuring notable Black figures like Harriet Tubman, Frederick Douglass, W.E.B. Du Bois, and famous artists like Nina Simone, Billie Holiday, and Aretha Franklin, and just to name a few. So today, the two artists just expanded their project further to include other monuments like the Jefferson Davis Memorial or the Corelon Monument under an organization named Reclaiming the Monument. And they aim to project images of unknown and marginalized narratives on various places and to collaborate it with students, artists, and lesser known artists in Richmond as well. And from these projects, it proved that this technology can be incorporated into the preservation industry. But for preservation, there is a designated period of significance which define the history of the sites. However, there are so many layers of the history underneath and overlay that period. And by setting just one period of significance, the entire layer of the history of the site can be forgotten. And projection mapping just has this potential to depict all of those layers and tell a fuller story of the site. So start with the Dender. They use this technique to offer the appearance of the multiple versions of the paints when there was no proof of the correct version. And the Harvard Mural took us back to its vibrant original in the 1960s while preserving the originality of the faded version. And San Clemente de Tau, on the other hand, show us not only one, but 3 periods during its lifetime. The light show took us back to 1123, 1920, and also revealing the remnant of the empty apse, letting it continue its deterioration like the living document of the site. And at Thomas Coe House, we can see the narrative about artists and about the artist and his works. And at Richmond, we see a contemporary intervention with the monument, which changes its meaning of the place. And this project just expand the meaning of the sites and help us see the potential of this technique. So the next component of this technique would be the software and hardware. So in recent years, the cost of projection, the hardware has been more accessible now. A projector can range from a few $100s or some just under $100 to a highly sophisticated one, which can reach 25,000. So I managed to get some information about the cost of each project that I mentioned earlier here. And we can see that the cost of the hardware is relatively accessible even for a small house museum. And however, when we look at the overall cost, it can be quite prohibitive to some. So the Temple of Dender, back in 2013, they managed to control the cost by working with an internship and fellowship for this project. But San Clemente Tau and Thomas Coe House, they needed to hire an outsourced graphic design firm. And this was where the expense went to the most, while the Harvard mural project reached $1 million due to its experimental nature. So, but for the software, right now, there are multiple software on the market right now, which there's like free version or subscribe version as well. And this has been developed to make lay people, including myself, to use it. So these software just serve the geometry correction purpose. The first one is called warping, which is the function to align the content to the geometry of the projected surface. And then the second one is called edge blending, which allow more than one projector to work together to cover a larger areas. And the last component of this technique is the projected surface. So on every resource that I found, all agree that the best surface for the technique is a white or light color surface. We are fortunate enough that most of the surface, like wall, ceiling of the historic structure, is like tend to be light in color. And like those projects that I mentioned earlier, they virtually turn the historic spaces into earlier period of time without so much problem. But there could have been some instances that we have to deal with darker surface. So I did just a small experiment adjusting the color of a grayscale here to the left and varying in value. And to the right is the colors varying in chroma or intensity of color. So on the grayscale, it turns out that it was not only about the color of the surface that matters. The color of the projected content play a role here as well. So you can see that a darker surface having a hard time turning into a light color, and then a light color cannot really be turned into a really dark color as well, because a projector cannot produce black. It's just an absence of light. And this difficulty just happened with the more saturated colors as well. As you can see here, that more intense color tend to show itself even with a projected light on it. And except for the really close color, like the red one here, that the color can get really close. And these are limitations that current technology is yet to overcome. But despite this limitation, this technology just offers so many opportunities for the preservation industry. It can visually turn the space into multiple periods with complete reversibility, especially for an underfunded institution, to let them tell a fuller story of the sites. And as part of my thesis experiment and to prove and learn from the application of this technology in a house museum, I utilized this technique in a small house museum in New Jersey called the Vail House. So I used this technique to review the original finish that is concealed underneath a modern layer of oil paint. And after talking to a curator there, just to make sure that this kind of technique aligns with their interpretation, its stairhouse here was chosen for this application. So the original finish of this space is this sandstone masonry. And this section of the wall was saved from the overpaint because it was concealed behind an elevator. So it was starting in a starting point for my visualization for this place. And the area of the application would be the wall on the stair landing here. because it's a transition space between both floors and it can be seen from the two floors as well. So using this existing original finish as a starting point, I digitally recreate the same finish to the target wall by laying the masonry in unit by unit to get the most realistic appearance as possible in Photoshop. And with marks of damage and deteriorations, I use the stamp tool in Photoshop as well to eliminate all of those marks to get as close as possible to the complete original finish. And to the left one is one with all the marks, and to the right is the corrected version to be projected onto the target wall. And like I mentioned earlier, I use an open source software to perfectly align the content to the wall surface. To the left one, here's the process. And then the result to the right is quite satisfying. So I invited 15 local professionals, including historians, conservators, preservationists, and architects in New Jersey to ask for their feedback last Friday. And they were all excited about this technology and its immersive, non-permanent, and cost-effective quality were among many positive comments from them. And here is another closer look of the results. We were able to perfectly align the masonry pattern to the wall and to the shape of the window molding. And because of the current technology and the fact that the projector was located quite far away from the wall, we can see like the window screen effect here on the image to the right, but you really have to like get close to the wall to actually see it. And because of this space has only one main alteration, so I was able to project just the masonry finish. But Melanie Baum, a curator there at this house museum, suggested that we can also project a photo of the original landscape outside the wall to expand the narrative that was restricted to only within the wall of the museum before. And this will help visitors see what the owner of the house saw back then in 1840. And which was a landscape lined with ironwork and factories and workers. And yeah, I hope that this presentation just help us spark a conversation to start using this technique more into our industry and to use it as a tool when a traditional way of preservation is not viable. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prima. That was wonderful. And yeah, you really the great projects that you were working on and you were sharing with us, and right up to the last Friday too. So very exciting. That's great. Any questions and comments? Open it up.
Hi, thank you. That was absolutely amazing. I'm just wondering, you talked about the camera or the projector position. Is there a limit or an ideal point distance from the projected surface to the projector?
Yeah, so right now projectors, they range, they have like multiple options. So right now there's like three main categories. The first one is like regular one, which we can see in a meeting room that it needs to be quite far away from the wall. But then there's like this shot throw or ultra shot throw version, which you can place it just right next to the wall, like basically a foot from the wall, and it can project like the light to cover the entire wall as well. So I would say that the technology is like keep updating all the time. And I'm pretty sure that, you know, a year or two from now, they're gonna be a new version of projector, which, you know, yeah, the location just depends on the model.
Okay.
I have a quick question. Has anyone, is this saved as like a file?
You mean the content of the
finished product, like that center photograph, is that an actual documented on a computer, file on a computer?
Yes. So like for these two projects, they kind of created from, so the first one they create from what they thought it would be and from the research. And then after they just like do the research on the original paintings, an original fresco, and then they just like translate it into a digital version to be projected onto the surface.
All right, so the next question is anyone ever used, let's say it was a famous museum, have they been able to use that image in their, you know, PR campaign or something, where it's actually printed?
Yes, for sure. Yeah, they can like, you know, take a photo of the actual artwork and then do the mapping that way.
Okay, and the last question, has anyone ever thought, even though it wouldn't be, well, I don't know, maybe it would be okay. Has anyone ever had it projected and they just said, let's paint what we have projected, so that the projection is no longer needed, it's painted that way?
Yeah. I mean, I would say that there will be some of the project that kind of use that. I mean, it's very famous to be used on the exterior of the building. I'm not sure if you ever see like the facade of the cathedral, for example, in European country, is like very famous for like utilizing this technique. But yeah, it will be restricted only in like evening time, because a projector cannot really work well during the daytime because of the sunlight. But yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, Drew, I think you're I mean, what's one of the wonderful things, as you described, is that it's non-destructive. It's a non-destructive way of, it's a win-win situation, I guess, of being able to show it as it was, or to show multiple periods. There certainly was I think you're alluding to, there's a long tradition of, I think, projecting, going back to the Renaissance, I think, of actually, you know, projecting images onto, you know, as a guide. So that tool is sort of a separate thing, where you're actually using the light or a projection or camera obscura kind of thing to then, as a guide to then do the physical drawing. But it's all just sort of different, different sequence through history, I guess, of a tool that artists have used. So interesting that this is a circling back in a different direction. Sorry, I might have interrupted someone who had a question.
I had a question, Jack.
Yes.
Grim, thank you so much for the presentation, but also I really appreciated the information you had on cost. Mm-hmm. And of course, the range that you were looking at, there was a variety of motivations behind them that would put such a wide span. I'm curious, for the experiment that you just displayed, the one that you did, what would you expect, if you're trying to project a budget for doing a one-wall display like this, which I think is a fabulous idea for house museums, right? Because they rarely have the ability to fully restore a space, but they want to display what it originally looked like, and you end up looking at black and white photos and then looking at blank walls. What's the right budget to think about for equipment and programming?
Yeah, I would say that, I mean, it's going to be under $10,000 for sure. So the projector here that I use, it's if I remember correctly, it's like $1,300. And like the file, because I have like background in design, so I am able to do it myself. So I don't have to, hire any like graphic designer to do it. So I can keep the cost that way. But I would say that for an organization that doesn't have like an in-house graphic designer, they will have to like hire someone to do this. But I would say that it's gonna be a few $1,000s.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I just remembered in my neighborhood in Charlestown a number of years ago, there was a projection onto our Bunker Hill Monument, which is an iconic obelisk, but actually was a predecessor, I believe, for the Washington Monument. But the neighborhood had a difficult history of drug problems. There's so many young boys and young men who died of overdoses or crime related to that. And the project was a mother's. It was really like the mother's project, and their projections of, in many cases, kind of unsolved crimes. And so they were silently projected on this a monument for a number of nights. So that was an effective way of just message and using something that, as I mentioned, iconic and can be seen from outside the neighborhood, in fact.
I'm wondering if the nighttime imagery, well, how did they ever be able to see that Egyptian place? Because there's always bright sun. Your photo of the colored renderings of the Egyptian exhibit. Is that interior then? Is that on the, did I get that? Yeah. Oh yeah, so that's inside the Met. It's not an outside Egyptian. I made it look, yeah, okay.
Yeah,
so they can control the light there, right?
Exactly. So that is why like they need to choose like the southern facade of the temple, because the other side just face like this huge like window skylights. And they use like this type of projector, which quite powerful to like compensate from that, like ambient lighting. But yeah, it's possible to do it during the daytime if you have quite like powerful projector to do so.
At MIT, there's a great, I think of the images at MIT Museum, which are actually done not through projection, but what would you do at night if you could trying to like looking at the colors of, have they projected Notre Dame, say, the colors of those cathedrals? Has that been done before?
I'm not sure about Notre Dame, but like after a cathedral in Europe, they did quite a lot. But actually, like, I'm not sure if you know San Antonio Mission in Texas. They did some kind of like a similar projection mapping on the facade of the church because it was like colorful back then. But I think that project is back in 2015, yes.
Yeah.
But again, you do it during the evening time.
Yeah, I saw part of that. It really was wonderful. It's sort of like, it's a sound and light show. It's with music and it's kind of telling the history of the missions and San Antonio and parts of it. Your locomotive that goes across from one side to the other, projected onto the face of the cathedral. And then other elements that really, as you talked about, are just tuned exactly to the architecture and work within the symmetry and the niches and so on. It was really engaging. And thank you for talking about the challenges with the colors, about dark and light too. I didn't really take a sort of advanced color theory of any kind, but I do remember from childhood, learning the science of, the difference between the red, green, and blue of a pigment color as opposed to a light color. And you can do certain, as you know, can do certain things with one that you can't do with the other.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah. Any other thoughts or questions? Well, thank you for illuminating this. Thank you very much. That's great. This is a great treat. Thank you again.
Thank you so much for the opportunity.
So, just to go, if you saw the agenda, I have announcements of a number, as we often have in the Boston area and virtually. We've got awards, save the date for some award ceremonies coming up soon. Women in the Built World is a half-day symposium. Women who are involved in engineering, restoration engineering, and related fields. And so that promises to be a great talk. About halfway through, I guess, I saw the Skyscraper Museum in New York has a series of free webinars. And And then there's a new a museum, the Samuel Slater Experience Museum out in Western Mass, talking about Slater's role in the American Industrial Revolution and tying into the Blackstone, I'm sure, River Valley Heritage Area. So thank you all for coming. Hope to see you in April. We are leaning towards for our April meeting. And by the way, it's going to be a special, it's going to be the first Thursday. We're scheduling that rather than our usual second Thursday. And we're leaning towards it being in person. We still need to circle back to our featured speakers who, well, one or more speakers, but we will be talking about K through 12 heritage teaching preservation and heritage preservation in K through 12 curricula. So are there any announcements? Anyone else? Does anyone want to share before we sign up?
Great program, thank you.
All right, thank you all. Good, so take care, be well. Thanks again, Queen.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks.
Bye all.